We are pro theories.
Yes. A series of things. Doesn't matter what
Yes.
things are. We just like putting them one after the other.
Yes.
Um,
Sounds like a Monty Python sketch. I'm sure there was something like that.
Almost certainly, yes, indeed. Right, hello to everyone who's appearing in the chat. Do, like, if you've got a moment, let us know where you're dialing in from, because that's something that we have never asked before, and I realised that it'd be quite fun to know. But yeah, thanks for coming along. This is, I think, part 6. I've slightly lost count because we've been doing it for a while, and we added an extra one, which then overwhelms my ability to do maths. So yeah, I think it's part 6 of our crafting serial fiction little mini series, which we've kind of taken from the start when you're planning it out, through the writing and how to find readers. And now this is a kind of bonus part on the end, which in some ways is about the things you can do after you've done your serial, or potentially during it. But it's, once you've got your story and you've finished serializing it, or you're, partway through it, and you've got all that amazing text, you've got your manuscript, like, what else can you do with it aside from putting it out on your newsletter or your serial platform and what have you? And I think for me, Sally, like, the key thing to recognize, as much as we love serials, as we just said, and like, I love writing serial stories and I love reading them and watching them and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of people who just are not interested in reading a serial. Like, it doesn't matter how good the serial is, that's just not their thing. And if you only put your writing out chapter by chapter on a newsletter or through Wattpad or what have you, there will just be a whole bunch of people who are like, nope, I'm not going to read a book that way. I like to read a novel or, whatever it is. So I think part of what we're talking about today is like how to cater for those people, as well as just doing some other stuff because it's kind of fun.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. I think there are some people who they'll want to wait until the whole thing is ready so they can read it the old-fashioned way, right? Like, they like to have that. I don't want to have to wait a whole week for the next chapter. I'd like to read the next chapter now if I can. And also, I think these days, it sort of used to be that the prevailing theory was that ebooks and digital reading was kind of where the money is and where that's the way to go. And I think increasingly the pendulum is swinging back the other direction, and people they like to own something, I guess, like an ebook, sure, but also, like, paperbacks are becoming more popular again, and even, hardcovers are too. And I think there's something to the idea of turning your digital thing into something else, like something else that people can purchase their own or even have on their e-reader, but yeah, just something that they can access whenever they want to. So
Yeah, definitely. I think for quite a while we all thought the internet was completely permanent and that things that we bought digitally or, owned digitally in some way was the same as having a physical thing. And over time, in various ways, that's proved to not quite be as simple as that. Whereas, if you have a book on a shelf, it will always be on that shelf unless you move it somewhere. Like, there's not going to be some CEO who's going to walk into your house and be like, no, I'm going to take this book away from you now. Well, you're not allowed to read it anymore.
exactly.
So yeah, I've certainly felt that kind of shift myself, where for a long while I was like, oh, streaming's amazing. Like, it's so much more convenient, and increasingly actually owning stuff or trying to figure out, a healthy balance of those two things. I don't know if it's just because it's nostalgia and I'm getting older and I'm like, I want to own CDs. But, yeah, that's kind of
I
where my
think that's
brain's going.
Yeah, I think it's part of that for sure. I think it's also just there's something about especially with self-published and with indie authors, it feels like you have a treasure that not very many people have, Like, I have this thing that is kind of unknown, and that's kind of fun, And, like, obviously you hope for that indie author that they'll be able to sell as many books as they want and stuff. But I think feeling like you're part of an exclusive club is kind of fun too. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we'll get to this a bit later on, but there's also this kind of emerging, really interesting extra level to it, where the idea of a collector's item. So not just, it's convenient to have a paperback of a story you really like because then you have the paperback forever. But the idea of sort of collector's editions, so that even someone who maybe did really enjoy a serial, reading it week by week on a newsletter, they might have read that thing for like 5 years, like every week a new chapter. So they're really quite heavily invested in it. And the idea of then having a physical item to sort of celebrate that thing that is maybe actually a bit more expensive than a normal book, but the whole point is it's it's a fancy thing.
Yeah.
That's a sort of newish thing which I've not done myself yet, but I do quite like the idea of it. I certainly like owning fancy collector's editions of stuff like that. So I think one way that I came around to thinking about this towards the end of writing Tales from the Triverse, and this is not something I did with Triverse, it's one of my things I should have done, is that I just kept putting the serial out week to week, and that was a 4.5-year project. And I realized that what I should have done is because obviously it was a ridiculously long thing, but every 80,000 words, I should have put it out like as a book, as a paperback, as an ebook that people could go and buy, because then people who weren't interested in the serial, or people who wanted to catch up, or just had other ways of reading, it would give them another way to discover the story. And I didn't do that, but I think with future serials, I'm going to attempt to do it. And I think I originally thought it was a bit like TV, where you've got episodes and then you might have like a box set that collects the whole season, which doesn't translate so well into the streaming world we have nowadays. But then I was like, actually, no, this is more like comics, I think, because comics kind of figured this out ages ago. And their model makes complete sense for people who are writing like prose fiction serials as well, whereby you've got the weekly chapters and they're like, a single issue floppy comic where, you just get that one little bit of story. But then every 10 issues or so, they collect it up into a trade paperback. And that's a thing that you can actually go and buy in a normal bookshop as well. So you don't necessarily have to go to a comic shop. And they complement each other, but actually there's slightly different audiences for these things. There are some people who will never buy the individual issues, just like there's some people who will never read a serial week by week, but they might still really enjoy that thing. They just want it in a different form. And then obviously at the end of the whole thing, you can have an omnibus edition, which collects everything together in some manner. And I think that makes quite a lot of sense. And I wish I'd done it as a sort of standard way of doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. I think too, like you said, it's hard sometimes for us to wrap our minds around the idea that somebody would not want to subscribe for $5 a month, but they would be happy paying $30 for something, for like a single thing, or like $30. I'm going higher on the higher end of, but like still just that idea that there are people who would rather pay a one-time price for owning the thing rather than paying an ongoing thing. But I think it's important to recognize that when we're serializing, because yeah, like you said, like there are some people who would just rather pay the one amount for an ebook so that they can have it, they can access it, they can do whatever they want with it. It's a mentality thing. It's just a slight difference in the psychology that I think preparing your serial as an ebook really does, or at least thinking about that as you're going along. I didn't have that idea necessarily initially when I was writing my first serial either. And obviously mine was significantly shorter than yours. So it wasn't that challenging
Makes
to
sense.
turn it into an ebook afterward. um, so I good on you for even thinking about that, because I don't know how to even like process turning that into an ebook. But yeah, I think when you're writing a serial, it is good to think about if it's something that you want to turn into an ebook or not. And if you do, to start thinking through, or an ebook, a paperback, whatever, to start thinking through, how do I make this interesting both for the audience who has already read it and also for a potential new audience who has no idea that I write serials. It's just they're going to encounter this as a book on its own. So yeah.
Yes, exactly. These are not entirely exclusive audiences. There's a big sort of Venn diagram crossover in the middle somewhere, for sure. And I think the other thing is, particularly if you're writing serials the way I do, where I'm writing and publishing as I go, usually, the idea of putting out a book at the end of it is an opportunity to take that manuscript that now exists and polish it, edit it, rewrite stuff, add to it, take away. In my case, I should take away from it, really. But you can turn it into something else. It doesn't just have to be a kind of one-to-one, like you just copy and paste the serial and there you got a book. You can do all sorts of stuff with it. You could fundamentally change the structure of it if you wanted to better suit it being a novel rather than being a serial. So it can be quite an interesting, like, extra creative project on the end of it, I think. Because no matter how much effort I put into my serials, like, they're not going to be as polished as a completely edited, proofed, checked over print book you go and buy in a bookshop from a big publisher. Like, that's just how it is. But the exchange is that hopefully people enjoy seeing the story come together in front of them.
Yeah.
But sometimes people just want the polished final product without all the faffing about.
Yeah. And I like to that end, I like to see my serials as public first drafts, like, especially because you and I both write as we go. I'm sure it's a little bit, the relationship's a little bit different if you've written it beforehand and you're posting what you've already written. But if you're writing as you go and posting as you go, then it really does feel like by the end of it, you have a finished first draft that it just so happens that other people read as you were going along, right? So that, yeah, it feels like you have sort of this, you've spilled all the puzzle pieces on the floor, and now you get to decide what you want to do with it. It's
Yeah.
all there.
Yeah, that's when you're like, oh, I know what the story is now.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, because I sometimes struggle, I think because of the way I write, I struggle sometimes with the editing process. Like, my chapters go through several iterations, but when I come back to just edit a manuscript, I know, like, you literally do that professionally. I find it quite hard because I'm so used to writing new words, if you see what I mean. The idea of coming back to something I've already written and having to edit it, I find that quite a mental challenge, I think, which is why I've only actually done it once so far. I need to get a better process for this. But yeah, I think it helps to see it as a new creative project rather than just sort of marking your homework in a way, which is, I think, how I used to think of editing. It was like, oh, I've got to go and, like, check everything now and, like, fix things. And yeah, it's a bit more to it than that. I mean, with your editing background, whether it's looking at someone else's manuscript or your own, what is your sort of approach? If you've got your serial and then you want to turn it into an ebook or a paperback, like, what kind of do you kind of rip it apart? Do you think, no, this is pretty much what it is, and I'm just going to polish it a bit? Like, what's your approach?
Kind of depends. So I only have one. I was thinking about it because I was like, I should give this some actual thought before we talk about it. But I only have the one IVN which was originally a serial on Substack that has been published so far. My other books are collections of short stories, which are significantly easier because you just mush them all together. But with Ivy and Ixos, it was my first serial on Substack, and it's a relatively short story. It's a novella, so it's not very long. And also, I was thinking about this today. It's also, because it's a YA-esque, it's about a 10-year-old girl, so it's like more of a young adult novel. The existence of cliffhangers was kind of okay. I think with YA novels, it's a little bit easier to kind of leave some of that DNA in there because, if it's for kids or for younger people, you sort of want to have that continual, like, oh, what's going to happen next? Um, so Ivy and Ixos was very much a one-to-one, where when I looked at the arc of the story, the only things I changed were there were some there were some characters. There's one character in particular who eventually was going to end up being in some of my later work. And I didn't want to put too many clues too quickly about her or about her life in this book. So I scrapped some of that just because, again, it was my first serial, so I didn't really know, like, what I was going to be doing later. Um, there were some things I kind of smoothed over, some details that kind of felt a little bit fuzzy, or that I kind of, or like things that bug, like when you're serializing, there's a few things that bug you in the initial that I was like, oh man, I wish I could go back and, like, delete that or change the wording on that. I didn't like that. Those, that's the nice thing about republishing, is that you get to, iron some of those things out. Right. So that Ivy and Ixos is almost identical to the novella, or the serial. Um, On the other hand, my story, Freelance and Fishmaids, that I'm working on right now, which will be my first novel that I'm publishing, there's a lot more that needs to be changed. A lot more that needs to be changed. And so that has been more of like a true revision, right? Where like I'm going through and I had to reread the whole thing again. And I was taking a bunch of notes and they're sitting over there. I've got note cards, color coded note cards that I'm working on right now, right? Like I'm just,
Nice.
it's the whole shebang of, yes, I have these pieces. But because I'm intending to publish this to an audience who has no idea who I am necessarily, like, yes, it's for my Substack audience for sure, but also like I want to be able to pitch this to other audiences who don't know me. Um, there is more context required. It needs to start in a different place. There needs to be some moving around. And like also again, there are certain things in the original serial that I'm like, I don't know why I put that in there. Like I don't know where that scene came from or
Made
um
sense at the time.
yeah, it made sense at the time. And it was honestly, I think when you're serializing, especially when you're week to week, sometimes you're just like, I just need to push this out. It just needs to go out. It just needs to be off my desk now. And then you go back and read it again and you go, if I was doing that over again, I wouldn't have done that. But that's okay. That's why I do get to do it over again. So yeah, so I am working on that. And that's what I would say is that I guess the practical advice I would say is that it kind of depends on the story. And if your story has that very serialized DNA where it's like everything ends on a massive cliffhanger or there's kind of an assumption that people will know some of these characters because maybe they've read some of your other work or like there's kind of a shared world there, it might require the full revision like
Yeah.
the looking really carefully at it and this is where beta readers can be really handy on that front end. If you have someone who's obliging who would who has not read your serial, that you can hand some of this to and say like, can you just flag for me the places where you're confused, right? Like tell me where the friction is because I think that's what a lot of writers who have never edited their own work or never revised, that's where they get stuck initially is they're just like, I can't look at this objectively. It just helps to have someone else to look at it and go, who is this character or why did this happen or where did this come from? And then it helps you to kind of see like where are the places you might need to smooth or delete or move
Yeah.
things around.
It is
Yeah.
notoriously difficult to edit your own stuff because our brains are so good at like auto correcting
Yep.
what we thought we wrote. And then your brain, as you're reading it, would be like, yeah, that's perfect. That sentence that way. It's all good. It's all good.
Um,
And then someone else
fun,
reads it and it's like,
yeah. Fun fact to make anyone feel better if they're struggling with this kind of thing. This is the fixed one, but the initial paperback of IB and Ixos contained a mistake. Some of you out there probably have the mistake one, where the chapter headings were numbered incorrectly. Probably not something people noticed, but I noticed, and my wonderful mother was the one who was like, "Did you mean to do that?" And I was like, "No, I did not mean to do that." So it
that's,
happens. It happens to everybody.
yeah, no, the book that
So
I self-published, No Adults Allowed, my son got old enough to read it last year.
mm,
I kind of wrote it like for him in a way. So that was like really special when he read it, except for when like every night when he was reading like a few new chapters, he'd be like, Dad, I just found another typo. So that was fun. And I think
great.
so that comes down to two things really, which is the way you publish your book, that there are options there. So we've talked so far about self-publishing and very much DIYing it as well. I think, where was it? I saw a question in the chat, which I think it was Tom asked about how much do you do yourself? How much do you pay other people to come and help out? And we'll definitely get to that. But even before that consideration, you have to think about how you want to publish your book, because we talk about self-publishing and that's something that basically anyone can do, for better or for worse, but you could try and traditionally publish your book. The fact that you've serialized your work does not preclude you from seeking a traditional publishing contract. They might want you to take the serial down at some point, but I think some people think it's a complete blocker, and maybe for some publishers it might be, but it's not like a blanket. no, you've already published this, so we're not going to work with you. There have been several people who have ended up with traditional publishing routes having serialized stuff. And like in the non-fiction world, especially, like quite often, people who write about, I don't know, cookery or something, they end up with pretty fancy cookery book type contracts at the end of doing their newsletter. So yeah, everything is open, I think. And then the third option is hybrid publishing, which I have always been deeply suspicious of myself.
For good reason.
Yes. I'm sure there are some hybrid publishers who are okay and who will do what they say they're going to do. But my general rule of thumb is that the writer should never be paying the publisher. Basically, the publisher should always be paying the writer in some way. If someone wants to spend the money and get someone to do everything, and the hybrid publisher goes and does it, it's up to them. But yeah, it's just to be cautious because there's a lot of dodgy firms out there as well who will take your manuscript and copyright, and you'll accidentally sign everything over to them. Anyway, so that's just a little word of caution there because I've seen that happen too many times. And actually, these days, like if you don't want to go down the traditional publishing route, you can DIY it yourself pretty easily. So there's not really any need to go down the sort of hybrid route, I would say.
Right. Yeah, I think the drum I'm going to beat in this conversation a lot is that everything has trade-offs, right? Every single choice that you're going to make in this has a trade-off. And Beck just said that sounds like vanity press. Exactly. Hybrid publishers have now adopted the term hybrid because it sounds better than vanity, but it's the same idea.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, everything is going to have a trade-off. And my biggest thing I'm going to say to everyone is that my hope for every author who wants to be published is that you will go into anything that you do with as much, it sounds dramatic, but I'm going to use the phrase informed consent, as much informed consent as you possibly can to know what it is that you're trading off. Everything has benefits and everything has costs, right? And so yeah, like I've as an editor, I remember talking to an author who wanted to do uh, vanity publishing because she just genuinely didn't want to have to deal with all the other stuff. She was like, "Yep, I get it. I'm going to be paying them money, but I want what they're offering." I was like, "Okay." Like that's not my path, but I hear you. Like I think so it's important to know what it is that you're getting and know what the options are, so that you can make the right decisions. Because yeah, when you're the one as the author paying the money, you deserve to know and calculate in your mind how much you're going to get from that. Like, is the cost benefit worth it in any particular thing that you decide to do? So
Yes. And if you're paying through the nose for a hybrid publisher to do your marketing, just know that you will not get good value for that, no matter what. Yeah. So yeah, in terms of the DIY route, then, so you decide to self-publish. That's what we've both done, and it's the thing that everyone can have a go at, basically. And then that comes back to Tom's question, which is like, how much do you do yourself versus hiring in people or finding collaborators to do stuff with? And this comes to like the crux of your point, which is, what are you willing to trade off? Because like you've got kind of speed, cost, and ease, I suppose. And you can only pick two of them. Is that right? Have I got that right?
pretty much.
Something like that. So if you want it fast, it's probably going to be expensive. If you're going to do it yourself, then it's going to take a long time, and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to come down to what your own skills are, what you're like in terms of picking up new skills, because some people are really good at that kind of thing. Some people have a kind of craft mentality that they can just do this kind of thing. In terms of self-publishing, there's inevitably a high digital aspect to it. So, you have to understand how to use certain digital tools. If you're comfortable with that, then you can kind of go as far as you want. But then, as well as the technical aspect, like how do you arrange an interior? how do you turn your manuscript into an interior that you can put inside a book, essentially, and how do you measure up a cover so that it's the right size and that kind of stuff. You then also have the more artistic side, which is like, if you want to design a cover, are you actually capable of designing a front cover? And I think, when it comes to self-published books, the thing that gives them away always is the design of the cover. I think like the quality of print these days is pretty decent. Like it can look like a proper book, basically. But if someone's chosen a bunch of really strange fonts and has just like found the first stock image they could find on Unsplash, then nothing wrong with using stock footage. That's completely fine. But it's that kind of like boop, 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 there we go, done. But even then, it depends what you want to do with it. If you want to sell the book to people and hope get as many sales as you want, then you have to kind of treat it like a professional book and it has to look decent. If you're doing it so that you've got some copies or you want to give it to friends and family, then that's less of a concern probably. Yeah. What's been your approach, Sally? Like, how much have you done yourself compared to finding people to work with?
It sort of depends. For the most part, most of my work has been homemade. And I will pause here to say that if you are someone who feels extremely intimidated by the entire idea of self-publishing because of everything we've mentioned with the formatting and cover design and all these things, I had zero idea how to do any of this like a year and a half ago, or 2 years, maybe 2 years ago now. Zero idea. And I now have 4 paperbacks and 2 ebooks that are just purely ebooks out. You can do this. I think you can do more than you think you can, is the first thing I will say. There are so many resources out there now. I will say, however you feel about Amazon as a company, their help articles, the KDP help articles, are awesome. I still use a lot of the formatting that I learned from those, and they're free. They're online. You can just look them up and it'll still tell you what the interior formatting should look like. It'll help you with a lot of the math. Like there's calculators you can use. It honestly isn't as math heavy as I thought it was. I thought it was going to be extremely math heavy. It really isn't. It just comes down to like, there's certain things that still bother me, and I'm fighting with Ingram Spark right now because the cover that I keep uploading is not the right size. There's that kind of stuff. Again, like you said, assume that if you're going to do it yourself, there will be time taken because there's going to be learning curves. There's going to be times when you don't get it right or whatever. But I found out that I really enjoy designing covers. I'm not saying I'm great at it. I just enjoy it. I think it's fun. And it's like, I didn't know that about myself until I started doing this. And I will say, though, that I have done, I hired a copy editor, the wonderful Sarah Dietz. I never say it out loud. Sorry, I'm Sarah. I'm so sorry. Lovely Sarah, who did the copy editing for my book, The Shell, because I really wanted it to be as typo free as possible. When I did, The Shell, because that book really mattered to me, and not that my other books don't, but by the time I got to The Shell, I really wanted it to be error free, and so I did hire her as an editor, and then John Ward, who did my cover for The Orchard Hounds, he and I actually did a skill swap. And I can highly recommend that idea. Skill swapping is awesome. He's an amazing illustrator and I'm an editor. And so I've done some editing for him and he did this cover for me and it's been great. So I would just say, yeah, like if you have a skill of some kind, or if it's something, or even if you can offer beta reading or whatever it is to somebody else, skill swapping can be a great way to keep the budget down, so that you're not spending through the nose. And I think that's a big thing I would say, is that just understanding your own budget, your own goals, and then how much work you're willing to do to make up the profit, I think is a big thing. Because I think that's, again, it's about knowing before you go into it that if you're willing to really work your butt off to make your money back, then like putting a bunch of money into it in the front end makes sense because you're going to invest in that and then you're hoping to get a profit on the other end. it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend thousands of dollars to get a gorgeous cover and do all the editing and do all the thing and then like kind of just let it sit unless that's what you want to do. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But just understand
Your
that like
money.
it's your money and it's your resources. And I think that's, yeah, it's about having that balance. And your goals are really going to be a big part of that. Of just like, what is it that you want? I knew that I wanted
Yeah.
to sell my books as much as possible. So I wanted them to be nice enough that I felt comfortable doing that. And I also wanted to not spend a boatload on the front end so that most of what I make is mine to keep, right? That was my own personal philosophy, but that's not going to be everybody's philosophy, so that's okay.
No, no, but that all makes complete sense. And you know, 'cause as an editor as well, I mean, do you have a sense of when people come to you to use your skills? Like, are they quite often like self-publishers, and how do you have any sense of how they're running that kind of equation and coming to that conclusion?
A lot of the people who come to me are brand new, have never hired an editor before. I've noticed that, and that's great. I'm happy to do that, but I think that's where it's good to have a little bit of an understanding of what you're hiring for when you're a self-published author and you're hiring an editor. Because I think some people go into it because they think, oh, well, I need to hire an editor because that's what people do, right? They hire an editor. Um, and there are different kinds of editing and they scale very differently in cost. And so a lot of the time I will encourage if you have just written a serial and you're contemplating publishing, right? Don't necessarily let your first port of call be, I'm going to hire the most expensive editor I can find to make this thing perfect. You're not there yet. I think your better bet is to either find a free or a less expensive beta reader to give you the overarching, or like, find somebody whose opinion you trust to give you their overarching opinions first, because you might not have to do as much work as you think, and or you might have more work to do than you think, and you don't want to hire someone to copy edit for you and fix all your typos when really you need like a general contractor to knock the building down and rebuild it, right? So I think, yeah, like with editing, a little bit of savvy on the front end can be really helpful for self-published writers, so they're not just like throwing their money after, so because I hate to say it, there are some editors out there who are willing to take that money and it's like, okay, well, you hired me to copy edit, so I'm going to do that, when really there's other stuff that should be happening instead first. So just, knowing the
Yeah.
steps is.
I feel like you should only go to an editor when you absolutely can't think of any other ways yourself to improve your manuscript. Like, it's something you do at the end when you've reached the end of doing it by yourself. You're like, no, I can't do anything else. I need someone else. Whereas, yeah, if you've just like knocked out your first draft, there's probably more you can do before you start paying someone to take over.
Yeah. Yeah. I think having a rudimentary understanding of revision, self-revision is really, it's going to save you so much heartache and headache in the long run, because, um,
And money.
and money, because you don't need, I think people assume they need an expert earlier than they actually need an expert. Like, and I get it, and believe me, it's how I make my money. So I'm happy to be hired, but at the same time I don't want to take people's money under the pretense that they think I'm going to solve problems that they probably could have solved themselves if they paused first to like look over their, and like, again, there's lots of resources out there for how to revise and for like different styles of revision. There are all different kinds of ways to do it. And I think, yeah, self-revision is your first step and it's free. So start there.
Yeah, exactly. I think what you said earlier about Amazon was interesting, because I use Amazon KDP to publish No Adults Allowed. I'm sort of desperate to get it out of Amazon now and publish it more widely, both so that it's just available in more places, but also so it's not only on Amazon, because that just makes me feel slightly icky. But I would completely echo what you said, which is that Amazon do make a lot of this stuff quite easy. So if it is the first time you've ever done this and you're quite intimidated by the entire process, using Amazon as a test ground to kind of figure out a lot of this stuff about, how does the cover relate to the interior, and what formats do I need to do this in, and what software am I supposed to be using? You can kind of go through the entire process and get your book out into the world. And then, if that went well and you enjoyed the process and that kind of thing, like most of the hard work you've done, you can use that to then come back off Amazon, go to Ingram Spark or Draft Digital or something, and it can still be available on Amazon, but then you'll have a wider distribution. uh, but you can kind of cut your teeth on the Amazon side of things because, it's definitely uh, a lesser learning curve, I think, when you're getting started.
Yeah, they make it really easy, and there's all sorts of templates and, I mean, even the cover templates when you're first doing paperback, it can feel really intimidating, but, like, when you just look at their cover template, you can start to figure out, like, okay, this is where the barcode is supposed to go, and this is where I would put, like, my little, my own, like, publishing house little logo or whatever. Like, you can kind of figure out your dimensions, and, yeah, I now have a couple of different documents that I use that I made myself that just have my checklist for. And so now I don't have to refer to the Amazon stuff anymore. I have my own preferred checklist. I'd also say that if you're starting out and you're trying to learn this stuff yourself, just look at books that you like, look at paperbacks that you like, look at ebooks that are professionally published. You can get pretty darn close to replicating what they do. It just requires you looking at it carefully and thinking like, okay, they don't have spaces there, or okay, they've only indented this amount, or I like that they had a drop cap, or I like that they had this spacing. Just kind of looking at those things and kind of trying to reverse engineer. And again, if you search for it, odds are you'll find somebody who's made a YouTube video showing you how to do it. Like it's out there. So yeah, and then the fun part is you can get fun. Like you can get creative with your editing. Just don't get too creative because then you want it to be readable. But I think like with
Yes.
formatting and stuff, you can have some fun making your book look professional. Like that's fun. That's a
Yeah,
skill you could learn.
definitely. And if you don't have a design background, like Sally says, look at books, but also look at like very different books.
Uh-huh.
Like get a coffee table book, and then get a YA book, and then get a romance book, and then get a sci-fi book. Just look at the subtle different ways that, like the choice of font and the typography decisions, the way chapters are introduced, all that kind of stuff, because they're going to be slightly different in each one. And all of those decisions are made for some sort of reason that most readers will never be consciously aware of, but which actually probably have quite a big, like, subconscious impact on them as they're reading. And when you start paying attention to that and comparing, two paperbacks which are in quite different genres, and you suddenly start to go, oh, this is interesting. They've done this instead of this, and like you say, then you're like, right, well, I can now decide what my book should have based on what the content is and the books that I now like the look of. Yeah. In terms of, like, we're not going to go too far down the rabbit hole of like software to use and tools and that kind of stuff, because that's a whole other many series, and there's so many of them these days as well. Like every time I mention a writing tool or a formatting tool, someone pops up and goes, "Oh, what about this one?" And I discover a whole new load. So, I mean, from my end, I write all my stuff in Scrivener, but when I came to do my paperback and ebook, I actually ended up using something called Readsy Studio, which is this online tool provided by Readsy, which is kind of like a marketplace where you can hire cover designers and editors and what have you. But they've got a free tool that you can just quick and easy format an ebook and a paperback. It's pretty basic, but it does a nice job. And again, the first time you do this kind of thing, if you don't have any design background, you've never done a book before, going the easy route is completely fine, because then you'll start to like form the connections in your brain. And then the next time you do it, you can then maybe go a different route and use a more sophisticated tool to take it up a notch, which is my general plan. What was your approach to actually doing it?
I I kept it as simple as possible because I'm just not a big software geek, and also my laptop does not support a lot of additional stuff. So I do most, if not all, of my pre-formatting just in Word, just in Microsoft Word, and I will say, if you are somebody who wants to do some of this stuff, getting familiar with how to do it in Word first will make life easier because there's a lot of these programs don't do the nitpicky stuff so much. Just like do it all in Word. And then I just use Kindle Create, which again is, yeah, it's a free program. It's a little janky, but it does the trick. And one thing that's really nice is if you are going to, like, I am very much in the Amazon ecosystem for now. It's not something I want to be in forever. But what's nice about Kindle Create is it makes the transition from uploading your file, if it was made in Kindle Create, it uploads seamlessly when you upload it to Kindle. There's a lot. Before I had that, I was just like trying to do it with PDF or a Word doc, and it would constantly error message me. It would constantly say there were things wrong with it. And so when you do it with Kindle Create, it just goes straight into Kindle, which is really easy. So again, like if you want to stay outside the Amazon ecosystem, like you said, there are options like Readsy and stuff like that. And I know there are lots of other platforms that you can use. I know like people use InDesign and stuff, which sounds very intimidating to me personally, but there are plenty of options out there. Just again, depends on how much you're willing to learn. Um, Back to trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
How much time are you willing to put into learning a new platform or app or whatever? But if that's what you want to do, that's great. And I think there's lots of options out there these days that were not there before. So
Yeah, and that's what's so brilliant about it. I think that regardless of your approach, whether you want to be completely hands off and just like press a button and be like, keep it in my book, that like you can do that, or you can go down the InDesign route or use something like Affinity Studio, which is free these days, which is crazy, and completely go down the hardcore designer route. And then there's all the stuff in between. Like I think on Mac, you've got Vellum that people seem to love. There's Atticus, which is like a web-based thing that, again, people seem to really like that. I've just been testing out something called Decal. Don't know why it's called Decal, but that's a kind of Scrivener light, but then bolted on with a whole load of export features that are designed to make it easy to make really nice EPUB and paperbacks, but you still have all the kind of design typographic settings that you might want. So that's an interesting one. But the point is, there's a program for every level of involvement and technical skill.
yeah,
There'll be
there's
something
also
to match what you want to do.
I forgot to mention there's also Calibre, which I use a lot for um, reformatting files. Like if I have a Kindle file, I can reformat it into an EPUB or like add metadata and stuff like that. So Calibre is another, it's a fairly popular one that you'll see people bandy about. But yeah, so just wanted to throw that out there again. But you're right. Yeah, there is literally a program for everything and at different scale of cost and different scale of complexity. So you can kind of decide how far you want to go.
Exactly. Tom in chat asked how Decal was spelt, and yes, it's Deckle. And yeah, it's sort of pre-release at the moment, so it's very new software, but I think it's quite interesting. I'm going to be keeping an eye on it for sure. Yeah, and similarly with cover design, there's a million different approaches to that. There's very, very sophisticated software like using Photoshop or Affinity again to do that kind of thing, or you can jump on Canva and put some stuff together there, which actually I used to be quite snooty about Canva like sort of 10 years ago, but it's sort of evolved into something that actually is pretty useful for doing like fast but surprisingly decent stuff.
All of my covers are made with Canva. I swear by it. I think it's just well, okay, I shouldn't say that. I swear by it in the sense that it's pretty easy to learn, and I did go ahead and spring for a premium subscription too because I realized how often I was using it and how there were certain features that I really wanted to be able to access. So yeah, I think Canva is a great place to start. And I think the free version probably has enough to get people going.
I think so, yeah.
I think. But yeah, and honestly, I mean, I think the subscription that I pay is like 15 a month or something, which, it's it's the cost of a streaming service. So one less streaming service for us, but it works out because I use Canva a lot. So
yes, and they've got quite good sort of guardrails and guides to help you not make terrible decisions along the way. I think
The only thing is these days you do have to beat the AI features off with a stick, because they do try to insert a little too much of like, hey, do you want to use AI to do that? It's like, no, I don't. Go away. You have to kind of keep telling it. But as long as you
yes.
don't mind doing that,
No,
it's
exactly. And Canva actually own Affinity these days. So Affinity Studio and Canva kind of connect quite nicely as well, which isn't it. So you kind of have the quick and simple or the highly detailed, sophisticated software, but talking to each other, which I think is quite an interesting approach to go. What else? Something I've been doing with my next serial, which kind of relates to this conversation as well, is I've commissioned someone to make me a cover for the first time ever, which is very exciting. So I've always DIY'd it myself in the past, but the support of the newsletter has basically enabled me to kind of reinvest a bit of that into stuff like the cover, which is very cool. So thank you to everyone for making that possible. But that's been a really interesting process because, I think, like you were saying, you have to be very aware and you have to know what you're getting into and what you're getting out of it and all this kind of stuff, because you don't want to be taken for a ride by anybody. But if you can find a collaborator to work on and you can afford it, or it makes sense in some manner, then I definitely encourage people to investigate it, because it's been a really interesting process. And actually, like, collaborating with another creative person on the cover, because it's my upcoming serial, it's actually given me a whole bunch of ideas for the serial itself and the text just through the discussions. And that wasn't something I expected, but yeah.
And for my upcoming novel, the wonderful AC Saunders is doing my cover, and the thumbnails that she sent me, I just found I had a similar thing where she sent me the thumbnails and I was like, I love seeing what an artist has zeroed in on as the important thematic elements of this story, And so, working with a human artist can be really enlightening as the storyteller. If it's something that's within your budget and something that you're willing, you're able to do, I think it really can make a huge difference in seeing what they see as being important elements of your story. So,
yeah, it's someone else shining a spotlight from an unexpected direction onto your own story. It's very weird, but very satisfying. So once you've made your book, you then have to get it out into the world. We've said how Amazon is the kind of easy mode, but the book will exist. People can buy the book. If you don't have any problems with Amazon, then you're all good, but it will only be on Amazon. So the problem there is, obviously, loads of people use Amazon, so it's not like you're going to be short of customers potentially, but you're also in a very flooded marketplace, and anyone who doesn't use Amazon for whatever reason won't be able to get your book, basically, which is why I'm hoping to get my book off Amazon, or off exclusively Amazon, that is. So far, it seems like the Ingram Spark seems to be where basically everyone goes, and I think draft to digital is the kind of other option. Those seem to be the two kind of self-publishing platforms that people go down when it comes to actual production and distribution. And the benefit of those is that they can get it into stores, into libraries, and can still get it on Amazon as well. So there's kind of not really any drawbacks other than it's slightly more expensive and slightly more confusing, basically.
Yeah, and also if you're going to go off of Amazon, or I guess if you're going to distribute wider than Amazon, you are going to have to start thinking about those numbers. What am I trying to say?
Sales?
The ISBN numbers.
ISBN, yes, that's the thing.
And that can start to get a little pricey. There are bundles that you can buy. I know in some countries you can actually get, there are programs where they'll give you free ISBNs, which is awesome. I don't have that, but that's very cool. So there are ways to do it. But every edition of your book, so that's ebook, paperback, if you do a hardcover, every edition of your book has to have a different ISBN number. So that's where, you do maybe need to budget a little bit for how much you're willing to spend, and how many books you're planning to publish. And that's where it does start to get a little bit pricey. But it is worth it to go ahead and, if you think you're going to really make a go of self-publishing, like go ahead and buy yourself a bundle of ISBN numbers and then it's there. You've paid the one price and it's already there. And then you can also get barcodes with that. The bundle I paid for has like 5 barcodes that came with that too. And that just makes life easier. Um, but yeah, so that's if you're gonna expand, Amazon will just give you they will produce an ISBN, their own. It's not an ISBN, it's like their own thing, ASIN or whatever, if it's just an ebook. But then you can't use that off of Amazon. It's just Amazon exclusive. So yeah. And then yeah, I've I've been in a long standing marathon with Ingram Spark. It's my own fault. I just get annoyed when I get the email kickback that's like, sorry, you need to fix your cover again. I'm like, well, I'm not going to. I will. I just need to get over it myself first. But all of my ebooks, well, 3 of my ebooks are on Ingram Spark. And it is really nice because they just automatically show up on Barnes and Noble, Kobo, Indigo, like all these different ebook programs. And I don't have to do anything. It just distributes on its own. And also it is available in libraries. Technically speaking, if people decide to ask for it, you can request my books on your library system. But yeah, so Ingram Spark is it's what it lacks in ease, it makes up for in wider distribution and more opportunities when it comes to that kind of stuff. So trade-offs. Always.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of one of the clearest ones, I think. And the ISBN cost is probably the most annoying upfront cost, because everything else, like, if you decide you're going to pay someone to design a cover, that's inherently really exciting. Like if you're paying an editor, it's going to make your book loads better, right? Like all of those kind of investments. If you're buying some software to do it yourself, that's cool because you're going to learn some new skills. Buying ISBNs is just irritating, but it is part of
And every
the
time you
cost.
use one, you have this thought of like, oh, that's like in your mind, you're thinking how much money you're attaching to your book. But it is what it is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I suppose that leads into the final part of the puzzle in a way, and how all this kind of investment or optional investment, uh, how do you get sales? Like what kind of sales should you expect? What does it actually mean at the other end of it? And I think this is the tricky thing, because until you do it, you basically won't really know. So your first book, it's very hard to know how much money to put into the production and design of it, because it's very untested territory. But I think something to consider is that even traditionally published books quite often don't sell very well. I think that's a good place to start from in a way, which sounds a little depressing, but like,
Well, I think uh, I'm grateful that I was given this piece of advice early on in my self-publishing journey, so I will now extend it on to other people. Um, the I think a lot of us have bought into the idea of what we a lot of our ideas about publishing come directly from TradPub, right? And so the issue is the way traditional publishing works these days, hasn't always and might not always, but the way it works these days is that it's all about debut culture, right? It's all about your first book. It's all about marketing that first book. A lot of money gets poured into debut authors, if you're lucky. But like that's the point, is that if you've been picked up by a publisher, the whole idea is they want to make as much money and as much hype off of that first book as possible. And then after your book is out and the reviews start coming in and you see how it goes, then the publisher gets to decide how much money gets invested in the future for you, right? That's how traditional publishing tends to work. I'm being very simplistic, but that's kind of how it tends to work. Self-publishing is almost entirely the opposite, where your first book, I'm just going to prepare you right now, is not going to be that big of a deal. Okay. And that's okay, because the magic of self-publishing is your backlog. It's all about continuing to add more things so that when people find one thing from you, they'll go, I wonder what else this person has written. And then they go and they say, oh, wow, look at all these other things I can purchase from this person. That is really where the magic of like a long-term career in self-publishing comes from, is continuing to add more things. Now, does that mean that your first book doesn't matter? No. But I do think there are a lot of people who go into self-publishing expecting that debut hype around their first book, and they get really disappointed and they quit when that doesn't happen. And all I'm just trying to say is, like, yes, build hype, market that first book, get all excited, but also, like, once it's out, don't make don't base the value of what you have to offer going forward on just the reception to that first book, because that's really not how self-publishing works. Like, you got to keep going. um, so yeah, I think go into it. That's why I would say, as much as possible, if you can do your first book, well, again, the balance here. Pay as much money on producing your first book as you're willing to then put in work to market it on the other side, right? Self-published authors can get really weird about marketing. Sorry, folks, it's just how it is. Like, if you want to make money off your book, you got to learn how to do at least a little bit of marketing. And it doesn't have to be torture. You can figure it out for what fits your style. But yeah, you have to think about how much work you're willing to put on the other side to make a profit on the other side. And if it's not a lot, then don't spend thousands of dollars producing your book. Just don't do it, because it's not going to work out in your favor in that way. Unless it's just you just want to have a beautiful artifact to hold on to, and that's great. Do that. But yeah, that's where I would go with that. Setting expectations.
Yes. Yeah, and don't invest anything into the production and marketing of your book that you're not completely comfortable with not making back. Like,
Yes.
don't expect you're going to get loads of sales and put all your life savings into it, basically. But yeah, the back catalogue point is so important. And it's similar to what we've said on previous videos about the way newsletters work as well. So that you can't start a newsletter and then a month in be like, oh, I've only got like 10 subscribers, I'm going to quit. Because actually it's a long game, like Ben said in the chat. And as that back catalogue builds, and this is something I've certainly found over the years, the value of my back catalogue is incredibly important now. And I have a 6-month rolling paywall, so anything older than 6 months goes into the archive that only paid subscribers can get. So all of a sudden that's like a really high value kind of proposition for people. But inevitably, obviously, it didn't exist when I started. And it's the same with self-publishing books, in that, the one book is hard to make an impact. But if you've got a series or you've got an ongoing thing, then those older books remain relevant and actually start to bubble to the surface a bit more.
Yeah. I think expect that the first book is going to be probably the most challenging to put together, as far as like learning the skills you need to learn, or making all the decisions you feel you need to make, especially if you've never done it before, just all these decisions that you need to put into it. And so the amount of work that you put into it might not feel worth it on the other side. Just get that into your mind so that the stuff that does happen feels great, because then it's like, oh, I did sell copies, this is great. And I would also say, like, again, the old self-publishing adage used to be that ebooks are really where all the money is. I do think that's changing. So, like, be open to the idea. Like, something that I do a lot is, I still do, I probably shouldn't at this point, but I still do it, is like I always keep they're down here, which is why I'm motioning. I always keep a couple of boxes of stock of my own paperback books. I always have them on hand, and I'll throw them into little free libraries around me. Why not? I'm not making any money on it, but guess what? Nobody knows who I am. So it pays to have my name out there, I always have them around to, like, walk into bookstores and chat about stocking books. I've had multiple bookstores at least be open to the option, and several of them have said yes. There's one used bookstore that I get just store credit from them. I don't even get cash for my books, but they have been my best selling store. They sell so many of my books that it's just like, okay, well, clearly you're doing something right. So think outside the box of necessarily, like, turning a profit. If the point is you want to get your name out there, you want to get your books out there, you want to get some attention. I mean, that's again, we could probably do a whole other series just on, like, marketing and book selling and all that stuff. But yeah, be willing to think a little bit about not necessarily making money on every single transaction, but on what it would look like to, like just get your name out there, get your books into the hands of people. It's kind of fun. Once you have the physical thing in your hand, you can just be like, well, now I get to do whatever I want with this. I can sign it. I can just hand it to somebody. I
Yeah.
gave one to somebody at the post office because I just happened to be standing in line and we were chatting, and I was like, "Here, have one of my books." They're like, "Oh, thanks."
Nice.
Why not? you know.
Yeah.
So
And having a physical copy, like if you ever end up, doing a workshop or teaching something about writing, or if you end up on a panel at a festival, or anything like that, having print books is really useful because people who attend that stuff will grab your print books, and if they don't exist, it's much more theoretical.
right.
The last thing I want to just throw in, really, I'm not going to get into detail on this, but just as an idea, I find it quite intriguing, is because what we've talked about essentially is upfront investment, and then your book's out in the world. Hopefully it sells, but you don't really know. You can pull certain levers, but as with all things books, it's kind of like, and you don't, and it's a long game, etc., etc. Like we've been saying, there are options these days to sort of flip it around a little bit, and I've seen a few writers do this in really interesting ways at different levels, which is to go the crowdfunding route.
Mm.
So you actually kind of flip the effort around so that you run a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter or something like that, where you can judge interest in your work. Now, if you've already done what we've talked about in the previous parts, and you've built up a newsletter over time, you've got a good readership in that way. If you can then take those highly invested people and say, here's a Kickstarter where you can buy this fancy book, it's only going to be available like via this thing, and it's going to be a hardback and have like fancy gold lettering or whatever. Quite an expensive book, but the whole point of it is a sort of collector's edition, like an exclusive fancy thing. But you can then measure interest in that, and if you don't hit your target, you don't produce it, and it's slightly embarrassing, but it's not the end of the world. You don't have boxes of expensive books lying around your house. I find that quite an interesting way around. Obviously, Brandon Sanderson did it on a like stupid epic scale where he just made millions and millions and millions. But I think Elle Griffin on Substack, she takes maybe 6 months or so. She takes her work and kind of compiles it and crowdfunds a fancy print edition, which is quite intriguing. And I've seen various comics writers go down that route as well. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out there as a kind of alternate extra wrinkle in how you can approach this kind of stuff. Once your serial's complete, there's all sorts of things you can do with it, is I think the main point.
Yeah, I've also been intrigued by that idea, and I've never tried it myself. I think, it's one of those things that, especially when you have built an audience and you've built a newsletter around your work, it just opens up all these cool possibilities for, this is going to sound kind of bad, but I don't mean it the way it's going to sound, but like leveraging the parasocial relationship that you have, but like not in a bad way, but like just in in a cool way. Like, here's a fun, different way instead of just like buying a paperback book, which is fun, but also like here's like you said, like a sprayed edges, or really like nice hardcover, or like I put some of this money into really making this as beautiful as possible. And for some people, like that's what they're going to want. They're going to want the artifact. It's fun to have something tangible that you can point to and say, oh yeah, like I was part of making this a reality. Yeah, I think it's the kind of thing that people should experiment with if they feel like they've got the kind of audience who's like into that kind of idea. For sure. Yeah.
Definitely. Right. Well, I think that draws us to the end of part 6, which is in fact the final part of this little mini series that we've done.
We did it.
It's been good. So, all the videos are available on the newsletter, so you can go and watch the previous parts if you missed any of them, or if you enjoyed them so much you just want to keep rewatching them like your favorite TV shows. But hopefully it's been useful. I've really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah. I'm grateful to Simon for being willing to do not just a single video, because we could have just done one live stream and just seen how well we could do with this. But to be able to do a series on this has been really fun to geek out with you. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone who's come along with us to learn more. And
Yes,
yeah, ask some really cool questions and stuff too. So
absolutely. Except Scoot, who's just a troublemaker.
yeah, get him out of here.
Exactly.
From
Right.
a ban.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for showing up for this one and the previous parts, and hopefully it's been really useful. But yeah, this is, I think, the end,
Yeah.
unless we come back for something else.